With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us the most precious thing you have, your time. So we do what we always try to do, turn down the noise in the news cycle a little bit, talk about things that actually matter, get to the information we need to better discern the times we live in. Now, we've been covering really heavy topics the last couple of weeks on Heard Tell. We've been continue to follow the CPS stuff in West Virginia. We've talked UK politics. We've talked about Congress. We've talked about the Trump trials. Today, we're going to have a little bit of fun because it's important to also have a little levity when you're dealing with this heavy stuff, but there's also a little bit of method to the madness. Our friend Sarah Stook, who's written for us before at ordinary-times.com. She also writes for Elections Daily. Great website that you need to put in your rotation, especially on an election year. We've had those folks on the program over the years. Sarah did something fun. She took the U.S. presidents and listed them and sorted them, but instead of doing a listing of best presidents or worst presidents or most handsome presidents or whatever, she sorted them into Hogwarts houses from Harry Potter. Now, if you're not super familiar with Harry Potter, it is, of course, a cultural phenomenon. It's a huge intellectual property. Something I first found out about it when one of my kids went to read it when they were little, and I read the first book just to see what was going on. It was pretty mundane stuff, even though it's wizards and whatever. But hey, Disney's had wizards forever. Folklores have had wizards forever. You can parent around that sort of thing. And of course, then came the movies, a bunch of them. So a lot of people know what Harry Potter is. So Harry Potter, you have these houses in Harry Potter, and they all have individual qualities. Some are a little more admirable qualities. Some are a little less admirable. Some are really ambitious. Some are noble, so on and so forth. It's a great plot usage for the world building of Hogwarts. So when you went to Hogwarts in the movies and the books, you got sorted. They put a sorting hat, which is a big wizard hat that has a mouth on and actually talks. We're not going to do that to pick presidents, although the way we're going, maybe we got to give it a shot. But you put the sorting hat on the kid. It divines whatever the internal properties of the kids is, and then it puts them in the houses, and that's the house they're in. It's very, old school English boarding school kind of stuff. Thankfully, I never had to deal with any of that, but it is interesting to watch on a movie. So Sarah took all the U.S. presidents and put them in there. So yeah, it's a little silly. There's also a basis of understanding here that we need to talk about things like this because it's a fun way to bring people into things like presidential history. A few President's Days ago, a while back, the Chicago Tribune did a President's Day quiz about the presidents. And they didn't just do a quiz, they did some metrics and numbers on what the responses were. And it's pretty interesting. Name 5 presidents, go. Is how they started it. Thing is, 1 in 10 couldn't do it at all. And the average for everybody was they could only name 8 presidents. Now, that's kind of interesting how you could do that. Now, a lot of people got the big ones. Lincoln was in the 80th percentile. People knew George Washington was in the 70th percentile. And whoever the current president was at the time tends to score pretty good. But then it starts falling off dramatically. And then you get into the non-founding fathers or the non-famous ones like an FDR or a Teddy Roosevelt. Reagan, of course, is within a lot of people's lifetimes, things like that. Jimmy Carter's been all over the news lately because of his ill health and his wife dying, unfortunately. So things kind of come and go. But a lot of these presidents we just don't know about. It's a lot about our own history. So if you do something like the presidents at Hogwarts, it brings people in. It's a fun way to do it, not just for kids, but for adults too. And it one of those things where, one of my kids is big into Harry Potter. I ran it by her and she's like, she didn't like some of the calls. That's okay. But that's why this stuff's fun. Taking history and learning about it and doing it in a cultural way that connects with people who otherwise may not do history. It's part of understanding our times is understanding the culture we live in. So we got to talk a little Harry Potter to talk some presidential history. We'll do it. Now, I had a couple beefs with Sarah's listings too, especially when it came to Woodrow Wilson. We'll talk about that. And when it came to Andrew Jackson, we'll talk about that as well. But it's a lot of fun. So Sarah Stook today on Heard Tell. We're going to talk Hogwarts and U.S. presidents right after this. – Welcome back to Her Tell. Okay, Sarah Stook is back, but we're going to have fun. Usually we're talking heavy stuff with her. History, presidential list, first ladies. She does fashion stuff. Today we're going to talk about Harry Potter. Yes, I know, but this is going to be fun. She did a listing of presidents, U.S. presidents, just to be clear, since she's in the U.K. We got to do prime ministers on this. That would be fun. But U.S. presidents, U.S. presidents sorted into houses at Hogwarts. This will be fun. Sarah Stook, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. It's been, for so long.
It has been long, but that was my fault. I took time off, and then we needed something fun. But I like doing stuff like this because it's just fun. But let's start with the basics for folks like me who just had kids. So we're kind of Harry Potter adjacent. We're familiar with it a little bit, maybe seen some of the movies. Talk us through what the houses are. And before we get into the sorting, see, I do know some of the lingo. Before we sort them, we're not going to use a hat. Talk about the houses and the Harry Potter and why you put the presidents in the houses here.
Okay, so there's 4 houses. First one is Hufflepuff. That's sort of seen as like the Duff house no one really wants to be in. That's like, I guess, like the equivalent of the Stoner house in a way, but they're all the really nice people who are friendly. They'll help you with your homework, very loyal and hardworking, nice people. Then you've got Gryffindor, which is sort of seen as the main house because that's what Harry's in. They're like the brave, the chivalrous, sort of the jock types, very, sporty, ready to go on quests. Then you've got Ravenclaw, who are the nerdy ones, so enjoy wit, wisdom, learning. Then you've got Slytherin, which is just traditionally seen as the bad house, so isn't totally sort of the best way of putting it. They're usually cunning and resourceful. They have pride in the fact that they're sort of pure blood, as in they're all wizard, no muggle human history.
It's interesting when you do these houses, though. Look, Harry Potter, you already said Gryffindor slanted because that's where Harry is and stuff. Was Slytherin really supposed to be the bad house, though? Because I know how they played out with, Severin and all that in the movies. Was there really a bad house, or was it just plot line? They're going to be kind of sort of bad until the big bad revealed sort of thing? Because you did put some unsavory characters from our presidential list in that grouping.
The majority of Slytherin, like the bad people who have been in Harry Potter, are Slytherin. And like when Harry goes to school, most of the Slytherins are not very nice people. But there are bad people who've been in Gryffindor. There are good people who've been in Slytherin. It's kind of quite a lazy thing. People go, "Oh, a president I don't like, he's clearly Slytherin," which may or may not be true. But in the Cursed Child, which is the sequel, which I don't really count as a thing, Harry's son, who's a perfectly nice guy, is in Slytherin.
Yeah. So let's kind of work backwards here a little bit. Hold that thought on bad people in Gryffindor, because you and me going to fight over Jackson here in a second. Let's work backwards a little bit. Our most recent presidents, you put Biden and Trump and Clinton and Slytherin. Obama got Ravenclaw. Both Bushes are in Hufflepuff. And then no modern real president. You got to go back to Reagan, over almost 40 years ago now for Gryffindor. Those are the most recents. Just walk us through them.
Well, people think, Biden, he's such a nice holding out in Hufflepuff. But he was in the Senate for 36 years. You don't do that and get to high good positions by being, nice. I'm not saying he's a bad person, but I'm saying he's got that cunning, he's got the resourcefulness. He acts sort of like a bit of a bumbler, but I think behind the scenes he's probably pretty tough. They say he can be quite tough to work for. He was vice president for 8 years, then he took a break, and then he managed to win, and now he's president running again, and he's in his 80s. Like, I think you have to have some grit and some resourcefulness and even ambition behind you to do that. So that is why I put him in Slytherin.
It's funny because people would probably recoil at Clinton and Trump being in the same place, but people forget before he ran in 2015, Trump and the Clintons were big buddies. They actually have quite a lot of similarities. They both have all kinds of...
His wedding. They went to Trump's wedding.
Yeah, they were at Trump's wedding. The third one with just to, because we got to specify, Trump, New York power player, went to Penn, came from money. He exponentially raised but he started with money. Let's just be honest. Clinton was the opposite, but he aspired to the world that Trump was born into. There's actually quite a lot of similarities. So I don't really have a problem having them lumped together, but it's funny who they're in there with. LBJ, JFK, Nixon, FDR, the Roosevelts. That's a lot of lineage, old power kind of stuff. That would play into Slytherin as the way you describe it then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Trump was hard to place because I think he's very controversial. People would automatically say Slytherin, but I think sort of what I think put him in there was his lineage, sort of the wealth and the power. That doesn't obviously mean every wealthy rich person would go into Slytherin. That has come from wealth, and I think he has that ambition to be a top presenter with The Apprentice, to be a top businessman, to be president. When he ran for president, everyone probably thought it was a joke, and then he actually won. So he had to have something behind him. And, regardless of what you think of Trump, I think Hillary Clinton won an incredibly poor campaign. Realistically, she should have beaten him if she'd thought about it, but I don't think she's a good campaigner at all. So I think Trump he thought, right, look at the middle America who was tired of globalism, as elitism, who the economic prosperity has passed them by. So, that's a good market to tap into. And I think that is pretty resourceful. So that's why I went for Slytherin for him, not for the evil orange dude kind of thing.
Yeah. Ravenclaw is interesting because you got Obama in there, President Barack Obama's in there, but he's the only modern guy on that list for you. You got some founding fathers on there. Wilson's in there. Ravenclaw is kind of a real mixed bag on your listing, but Obama's the only modern guy. I found that kind of interesting.
Well, I think he's got the learning part. He went to 2 Ivy Leagues, so he's not dumb. He's a very intelligent man, and I think he's got that sort of that. He seemed always like that wise guy, that very full of zen, above everybody else. Kind of when he played against Biden was sort of like the funny guy. Obama was like the straight man, and I think that sort of plays into it a lot. That I think he had that leadership, that wisdom.
The other one that's interesting on that listing, how the founding fathers got divided in here. Did you divide them up on purpose, or was it just kind of one of those things how they fell? Because you got Jefferson down in Ravenclaw, Washington's in Gryffindor. I guess that was kind of like probably one of the automatic ones. You're just going to have to do that. But you kind of divided them up and spread them out here.
Yeah, I mean, Washington, straight Gryffindor, brave, chivalrous, adventurous. They said he was
the model of presidents.
Yeah, he was
he
a
based
really
everything.
honourable man. He was very big on it. He hated swearing. He expected his troops to be very well behaved. His relationship with his wife, it wasn't a love match, but he was very devoted to her. And I think that maybe when Hamilton cheated on his wife, Washington would have thought, what a dishonourable thing, despite it being pretty normal back then for high-ranking men to cheat.
Interesting. Hufflepuff, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but you got a lot of military vets in Hufflepuff, which is interesting considering the way you set up, how that house is set up. You got Ford and Carter. They're both Navy guys, both Bushes. Bush W was a National Guard, but of course HW was a well-decorated naval aviator. Grant's in there. Tyler, Truman's in there. But he made the call to drop the A-bomb, so you got to call him a little militaristic. Was that purposeful, or did that just sort of happen? Because I found that kind of interesting.
Well, Truman did serve in World War I. He memorized the eye chart so that he could serve. Otherwise, his glasses would have stopped him.
Right.
So but yeah, I think Hufflepuff, it's seen as fair play, honor, and justice, which I feel goes into a lot of the military. Yeah, he was very big on honor, and he was surrounded by a corrupt administration, but he was very, a decent guy. He wanted equality for African Americans. I'm not saying he was a true egalitarian at the time. Many were personally racist, but he did believe that, he crushed the KKK. Unfortunately, that did not last, and they came back stronger than ever years later. And he was known for being a very decent guy, very much in love with his wife, a good family man. So despite the bravery of Gryffindor, I think he embodied the traits of justice and fair play a lot more than he did bravery.
Gryffindor obviously is loaded up with the iconic presidents. You got Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Eisenhower, Reagan, Washington. You put Jackson in there. Now here's the thing about Jackson. Personally, as a human being,
he was awesome.
He had horrible morals on a lot of things. We know what he did to the Native Americans, that sort of thing. But he's one of those where the iconography of him, if that's not a word, but you know what I mean, the marbleized man, he's one of those historical figures where as time goes on, usually you don't chip away at the marble statue, but he's one of those that really has. But doesn't that kind of play into it too? It's like, okay, yeah, they got the houses, but in the lore that we're working in here is like, yeah, he started out as this really good guy, but then the more you dig into it, he really wasn't. But he was still one of those foundational pieces to America. That's a complicated character if you want to tell that kind of a story.
Well, Peter Pettigrew, one of the main villains in the story, was the Gryffindor. I don't think he necessarily had the traits of Slytherin in that, you know, the cunningness and the resourcefulness. I don't think he was stupid by any means, but I think he was sort of, as it came, he was angry, he was tough. And, you know, he went from being an orphan who, you know, hated the British because they basically killed his family. His father died before he was born. He was, you know, he had that temper and that energy and that adventurous, which, you know, he didn't come from wealth. He didn't have that, you know, pure pedigree. So I think, you know, you can say he, you know, you can't deny how he was, not just Native Americans. He was known for being very cruel to his slaves. And you can argue slavery should automatically put you in Slytherin, but he was known for being extra cruel. So while he's still got that reputation, I don't think it necessarily makes him a Slytherin.
It's amazing how you got to say extra cruel to a slave owner. Sarah Stook joining us. Let's talk about the worst presidents. Of course, the founding fathers and the really big iconic presidents like the Lincolns and the Roosevelts, they get a lot of the press. What do you do with the James Buchanan kind of universally is, you know, almost single-handedly brought about the Civil War? What do you do with people like a Buchanan, like a Wilson, who's, you know, in my opinion, one of the worst presidents we ever had for a lot of reasons? Then you got kind of the guys that were bad presidents just because of circumstances. You know, you got the John Tyler, who was only in office for a month because he died. You know, people, you know, the Millard Fillmores, the Hardings, people that got caught up in the circumstances of the times. You've done these presidential lists a lot. What do you do with the guys at the bottom of the list when it comes to something a little more fun like this?
Well, I think you've got sort of the difference between actively an awful president and circumstance. Like Franklin Pierce is one of the worst presidents. However, his personal life was like probably the most tragic one. He had the most awful.
His son was decapitated while he's on his way to Washington. Like,
and I don't want
to say, I don't know. You want to give the dude a pass, but you know, I kind of got to want to feel bad for him.
His whole wife was just mentally. She was always a bit. You wonder how they got married because they're the most different people on this planet, and it was very nice to her, but like she was a handful to put. She was a bit of a Mary Lincoln. She was like very difficult, and I mean, you can't blame her after what happened to her kids and all. But he was known for being a very nice guy, very congenial. I don't think he actively wanted to mess things up. I think he just wanted to keep the peace so badly. He sort of kicks the can down the road and probably helped towards the Civil War because he was like one before Buchanan, so he was sort of one of the first to really. I mean, I think maybe a civil war was probably inevitable. Samuel Adams did say that way back in the 18th century, but yeah, I think he meant well. So you can't really put him as a Slytherin, but he wasn't, you know, brave or smart enough to confront the truth.
Yeah, and the thing about it, Lincoln is pretty much universally regarded as one of our greatest presidents because of what he overcome, because of the Civil War, because of what he had to do. He died, you know, being assassinated added to the legend, but no other president had to put up with what he put up with, successfully at least. To be bookended by Buchanan and then Johnson and the train wreck that, you know, people forget. We've talked about it before on the program. Johnson was so drunk when he was sworn in as vice president that Lincoln literally thought about sending him home and firing him. And then Lincoln got shot before he could leave town. Like, they were going to get rid of Johnson, and he became president.
Well, he was lucky because they were targeting him to be assassinated. It was a whole plot. Obviously, they went for Seward as well and Grant. And
his assassin got so drunk he didn't go through with it. It was
so like Johnson
ironically.
Was so lucky. Yeah, he's a Slytherin because I think he was really hard to place because historically he wasn't a bad person. but he hadn't got like the traits of Hufflepuff of fairness and justice. Ravenclaw, he wasn't particularly, intelligent or wise. Gryffindor, he wasn't brave. I suppose Slytherin, because he came from nothing. He was educated by neighbours. He never went to school. His wife had to help him with his reading and writing. And then she said to him, "Oh, why don't you enter politics?" So I think it's just on the ambitious front, he was pretty easy to put in there.
That makes sense. Sarah Stook joining us. When you're talking about Harry Potter, and I know J.K. Rowling's gotten tied up in some of the culture war stuff, but I want to stick to the themes of the book and this sort of thing. One of the themes of Harry Potter really is power and how you weld it and who gets to weld it, which is a universal theme in almost any, you can take Star Wars, you can take anything. Those are universal themes, especially when you're talking about a fantasy novel. So when you apply it to a president, it's interesting because we just kind of talked about it with some of these guys. Some of these guys were really, really power hungry. Some of them were look, you don't get to be president if you're not somewhat ambitious and you don't know how to play the game, with a few exceptions. But the story of the U.S. presidency really is power and how you weld it. And that's a core theme of Harry Potter, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the only exception you could say is probably Ford, because he was never on any ticket. He just came after Agnew. Everybody else was on a ticket, either as the lead or as the vice president. So everybody else agreed.
They mocked him for it. Like we have Saturday Night Live. Chevy Chase got famous mocking Ford for being a
It sound like him. It's just like
no. Well, that was part of the gag, but Ford. What you just mentioned. Let's talk. Ford was war hero. Was an amazing athlete. He was the captain of the Michigan football team. An amazing human being on all levels possible. And we turned him into a mockable figure just because he, was trying to be a decent guy in a position where being decent usually gets you trampled. And that's exactly what we did to Ford.
I think it is what the America needed in terms of, healing. But I think obviously him pardoning Nixon was a little controversial. And he could have probably actually won 76 had he not pardoned Nixon. It was actually a lot closer than people think. I think pardoning Nixon cost him, but until the end of days, he thought that was the right thing. And he hated himself for kicking Rockefeller off the ticket. He said the most cowardly thing he'd ever done. But it was just known as so, generally nice. That's why he became vice president. Like everyone in the House said, okay, we'll vote for Ford because we all think he's a really decent dude. So he was in a position that got him by actually being nice. So that's impressive. That's a good legacy to have. It's better than spying on your enemies.
Is he the nice guy that just wound up doing the nice thing that saved everybody at the end? So is he the long bottom of this story?
I think he genuinely felt sorry for Nixon. He thought, it will be better because if it'll be a long trial, it'll be televised, it'll take away from politics. I think he thought he was doing the right thing. And I don't think he ever regretted that decision.
No, I don't think he ever regretted it either. Sarah Stook joining us. One that I find interesting, you put the Bushes together, which I get. They're father, son, blue bloods by any standard of any definition, but they really are very, very different people. H.W. Bush, of course, World War II war hero, was probably one of the most credentialed presidents we ever had. He'd been everything. He'd been, from Congress to running the CIA, being vice president 8 years. Bush was extremely, competent. Let's put it that way. He ran into a societal and cultural revolution in Clinton, and, the Times caught up with him a little bit. George W., controversial in a lot of stuff, the post 9/11 stuff. You can say what you want to. You put them together, but they're very, very different people, even though they both came from that blue blood Bush line of Bush was by his own admission, this is his own words, I'm not trashing the guy. The guy was a fall down drunk for the better part of a decade, and then got it put together, found religion, and got into politics and found his footing. His father didn't seem to have a whole lot of missteps other than his mistress that he had an office for in his office. We'll talk about that some other time. They're very different people, even though they're in the same house here and they carried the same name and they have the same lineage.
I think they both, Hufflepuff say it was fair play and justice. I don't think, Bush Jr. had any other traits. He's not got like the bravery of Gryffindor. He's not got like the wisdom of Ravenclaw. He's not got like the cunning. That was more maybe Dick Cheney and his cabinet. But I think he generally is such a controversial figure. And, I think the Iraq War was a terrible idea. But I do think he did go into it with he genuinely believed it, and I think he felt like he was doing the right thing. And like, it's that famous thing, who would you rather have a drink with, him or Al Gore, and everyone said him because Al Gore is the most boring person on this planet, and I will still forever hate my teacher for making us watch An Inconvenient Truth. And George Bush Sr. was kind of fun. He could have been Gryffindor because he's brave, he's very intelligent Ravenclaw, and I think he probably was ambitious, but I think he was sort of like this sort of folksy grandpa. He'd become after Reagan, who was this big showman, and I think that idea of he was a hard worker, he was more fair play. I think as a person and as a father, I think that's what I would put him as.
One of my favorite characters in the Hall of Presidents is John Adams. Where does he fit into this stuff? Because and the reason I find Adams so fascinating is because he was a contemporary of all the founding fathers, and he was one, but he was also removed from it a little bit, especially his presidency, where he was almost an observer who was commenting on it as it happened, almost like he was standing back from it a little bit. I've always appreciated his perspective on it. I thought he was one of the more insightful and self-aware of our founding fathers. How did you slot him here and why? Because I've always found him to be one of those guys, like, you know, there's things to criticize, there's a lot to like, but he was a very self-aware guy who did almost a running commentary on his times. How did you slot him here? Because I think he's one of those guys, if you're going to put him in this fantasy universe of Harry Potter, he'd probably fit right in.
I think he's definitely a Ravenclaw because I think, like you say, he was very self-aware, which leans into the wisdom aspect of it. And he was very intelligent. We know he went to Harvard. I know a lot of rich guys did back then, so it's not necessarily a credit, but he was very clever. He, wrote half the government documents. He was a diplomat. He did, there's probably the only one, maybe more. I think probably the most prepared president was probably John Quincy. I mean, he did everything, but his father definitely had that Ravenclaw intelligence, that wisdom, that leadership. He was a very complicated man. He was a devoted family man. We all know that. He was very difficult and he didn't make friends easily. He was enemies with Jefferson. Washington didn't like him. Hamilton hated him. He was kind of a very Marmite, love or loathe him. But I think you can't deny sort of his brilliance.
So the big bad is he who cannot be named. If I got to pick him, I know we talked about Buchanan. We know Jackson liked to murder Native Americans. There's plenty of bad people on here. LBJ was very profane. How that falls on your own, moral compass is up to you. We have some truly bad people that have been president. I've got to say Wilson, though.
Horrible.
Put together, he just looks evil when you look at the pictures and you read about what he did. He set back race relations in this country probably 50 to 75 years at a minimum. A horrible, horrible human being by all, and his wife too, who was president for at least probably a year and a half, if not longer, while he was, incapacitated with a stroke. I would put Wilson as my big bad evil, he who cannot be named out of this list. You have a different one.
I don't think I think Ravenclaw fits him because he was very, very intelligent and he was academic. He was president of Princeton. He tried to clean up so it was a little more, less lads having fun. It was an actual serious academic institution. He had a PhD. He translated documents. I don't think he necessarily had that cunning. It was more, I think, luck of the circumstances. And he didn't have a resourcefulness or cunning. It was more of a coldness. And I think he genuinely believed a little too much in himself. He believed that, God had put him on this earth to be president, which is basically a divine right of kings for presidents. So I think he definitely suits Ravenclaw, but you can still put him on a moral standpoint. As like I said, he was a very horrible person, but a horrible person can still be very intelligent. And he guided America through World War I. So, props to that. And when you eventually joined, obviously, it took you a little while.
Yeah, we can argue that one some other time. He bungled a lot of that too. Sarah Stook joining us. Okay, so let's take the big characters. If we're going to do the Harry Potter thing, let's go all the way through it. Who's the Weasleys of this group, do you think? If you had to pick a couple of them, the rough and tumbles that kind of push through family lineage. This could be interesting because we have some dynasties here. We have some not highbrow dynasties. Who's the Weasleys of this group, you think?
We've got the Harrisons. They were related. I mean, there was a lot of them, and there's a lot of Weasleys. So yeah, William Henry Harrison, obviously only president for 30 days, so kind of hard to rank. But if you look at his early life, he's pretty
a redhead. We've had a few redheaded presidents.
Coolidge was, Jefferson was, Washington was. I don't know about Harrison's. I think they were maybe dark-haired, but yeah, they were the redheads. So yeah, William Henry Harrison, interesting character, very brave. He had very strange relations with Native Americans. He had them in his house and respected them, but he also fought them on the battlefield. So he wasn't a bit of a Jackson where he actively wanted to kill them, but you know, he was very famous for that. Benjamin Harrison, who married his wife's niece not long after she died, and who was younger than his children, which was icky, but was very, very cold, which I think fits Slytherin and family, obviously the pedigree. So yeah, but there's not really, Benjamin Harrison's an interesting one because he's not that interesting a person. I think he just got lucky that he was born a Harrison. Some of those people like definitely benefited from nepotism.
So Taft has to be Hagrid, right?
Taft was definitely Nepo, but I think he was actually very intelligent because he didn't want to go into politics. He wanted to be Supreme Court. And then it was his wife who said, I want you to be president. And then she had a stroke almost immediately and couldn't enjoy being First Lady, which kind of sucks. But then he got to be Supreme Court Justice. And I'm sure he was very happy. I'm happy for him.
One of my favorite historical presidential pictures is him and Wilson at Wilson's inauguration. It's hilarious because he looks like the traveling case that you put Wilson in to ship him to D.C. because he's so much more massive than the very, erudite and astute and prim and proper Wilson. Okay, who's Hermione here? And I don't want to I know people will get mad about switching gender roles and such, but who plays that role here? Who's the wise person running around trying to hold it all together, do you think?
That's hard as I could say maybe George Bush Sr. He seemed to have it locked together, especially with his own family when his son was out being drunk. He sort of sorted that out, and he was in power for a bit.
Tossed him aside for a crazy womanizer. There's some, nobody listened to him, and we wound up with Clinton. So, And
then Reagan was shot, and he had to sort of hold the ship a bit. I mean, there's probably a few that had to hold the ship. Garfield took a long time to die, and so did McKinley. So, Roosevelt and I suppose more Arthur had to really work it out. Even John Tyler, because there was no precedent for a president dying. So everyone's like, he's acting president. Tyler's like, no, I'm president. The cabinet went and he got kicked out of his party. So maybe a reverse Hermione in that sense, but he was trying to hold it together at least. Now everyone thinks he's awful.
Yeah, it could be. Okay, the tough one, the big one. Who would be the Harry out of the American presidency? So coming out of nowhere, a lot of people probably going to go Lincoln there, I would think, especially since he died and Harry did technically die. I know, spoiler alert, but if you haven't watched the movie by now,
you've not seen it, come on, it's been out for like 25 years.
Yeah, he did technically die, although they brought him back. Is it a Lincoln? Is there another one to really come through? Washington wouldn't fit because Washington was the richest man in America when he died by some estimates. So that he was an aristocrat. Let's be honest with that. So that one don't really. Is there another one that's even close to maybe a Lincoln here?
Well, the thing is with Harry is he had this destiny to meet Voldemort, and he had a hard life. His parents died. His aunt and uncle were awful. But he's actually not a lot of people's favourite character. So I give someone who's popular, but not like one of the big ones like Lincoln and Washington, who are like up there. So I think it would need to be someone. Oh, I suppose Jimmy Carter's lasted a long time.
Yeah, that one works.
He came from nothing.
Yeah, went in the Navy, built his Navy career, saved Canada from a nuclear disaster, loved his wife, still hanging in there. God bless him. He's still alive as of the time of this recording.
I think it's going to make it to 100. I truly do.
It's remarkable.
October. Come on, make it 1st of October, babes.
It's funny because, Clinton has that hard Scrabble story too.
Yeah.
But then he took it the other way and became a sex pest and a bad human being. it's funny how these guys, these men, because we haven't had a woman president yet, we will at some point. It's funny how these men, their origin stories are similar. So if we're going to beat the analogy to death, everybody started at Hogwarts under the Sorting Hat in the first year, right? Everybody starts at the same place, but they wind up in drastically different places, even the ones that are close friends, even the ones in the same houses. You can say that with the presidency with a lot of these guys. Some of them have similar stories. They grew up either, privileged family like the Bushes and the Kennedys. Some of them really hard early lives like Clinton and Lincoln and some of these other guys, but they wind up in very different places.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a hopefully election daily article coming out, and it's sort of ranking the presidents on how likely they were to become presidents. So sort of background, education, political, military, and then like other personal circumstances. So somebody like, Lincoln, who had no formal education, lived in like backwaters of Kentucky, you would not expect him to be president. And then you flash forward to someone like FDR, who comes from like the elite of the elite, but I suppose, his polio, that they say it's probably not polio these days, him being paralyzed really changed things. There are some who I think were probably almost destined in a Harry Potter kind of way to be president. And then some who you just think either did it out of right circumstances. Trump realistically should be one of those people you think would be president. He's from a very wealthy family. He went to an Ivy League college, had a successful career, but he didn't study law. He wasn't in the military. He's never held political habits. Him and Zachary Taylor. So there are some. It's sort of strange. And then Clinton, who they say was so captured the charisma of a politician, yet came from backwater Arkansas. Father died before. 3 presidents had fathers who died before they were born. A lot more had fathers who died when they were young.
It's interesting with our presidents too is the times really make look. Lincoln, if the Whig Party doesn't collapse into nothingness and the segregationists and all that, there was an extraordinary conflagrance of circumstances that let Lincoln be president, because otherwise he probably never would have been president.
And the Douglas debates helped a lot. I mean, Mary Nearly actually married Douglas. He was one of the men courting her because she was a very popular young lady. So, butterfly effect, she could have been President Mrs. Mary Todd Douglas.
Yeah, probably good for Stephen Douglas. She wasn't with all the issues she became. Poor woman just was. Now we would understand mental health and things like that and the tragedies in her life. But Lincoln would have never been president without about 4 or 5 really extraordinarily earth-shattering events happening in one side. Somebody like Teddy Roosevelt, you just kind of think, okay, he's going to get there. Like, they even joke
because he said he was. I mean, he didn't want. If he'd actually run for election, fine, but he only got in because McKinley got shot. And Mark Hanna just said the only thing standing between that and the presidency is a bullet. This damn cowboy is going to be president. And then no one thought, McKinley is pretty young. No one's going to want to hurt him. Shot 1901, bam, you got. I mean, if Hobart hadn't have died, he wouldn't have even been vice president. It's just that Hobart died in 1899, so they had to find somebody else.
Yeah, and then the bullet didn't work killing him either later on, we found out, with Teddy Roosevelt. That's a great story where it hit the speech in his pocket and saved his life, and he gave the speech anyway. But it's funny, these president, George W. Bush, okay, yeah, that guy's probably going to at least make a run for the president. You could have predicted that. Nobody thought Ford, who was perfectly happy in Congress, wasn't really looking to do anything beyond that. Nobody thought he was going to really be there. LBJ, I think he liked the power of it, but he was the ultimate insider in Washington. I think he was perfectly happy probably of just being in Congress. It's funny how these work out. And then Kennedy, who was, it was supposed to be his brother, and Joe being the detestable person he is, he just slotted the next kid right in there. the Kennedy, you knew that there was a plan for 40 years to get a Kennedy into the presidency. It's funny how these things work out.
LBJ is fascinating because, like you said, he's a very much Washington insider, but he's also very different. He'd never studied law. He was a teacher from poor Texas. He seemed like almost an outsider, but at the same time, in the way that Kennedy was an outsider because he was Catholic, but he sort of was that wealthy. He probably had the connections. He once shared a sleeping cabin with Nixon. It's kind of fascinating how, so some of them seem more inevitable than others. Like, I'd say Joe Biden didn't seem inevitable, and I don't think Trump, Obama purely on racial grounds, that they never had an African-American president before. When he was born, Jim Crow was still around. It was way before the Civil Rights Act. The idea of a black president in 1961 was probably even more unlikely than a woman president, because you had Claire Booth Luce run in 1964. She wasn't going to win, but I think people were much more tolerant of a woman than a minority.
LBJ, when he was the Senate Majority Leader for 6 years, was unquestionably probably the most powerful politician in the country. Like, it's not even close. So it wasn't like he didn't have power. That's what's so fascinating about it is and people know now because he's forever linked with Kennedy and then became president and then the Civil Rights Act and that sort of stuff. But when he was in the Senate, he was probably more powerful in the Senate than he was as president.
I think
he felt that in a way. It's really weird.
President. I don't really know why he would say yes, because he didn't like Kennedy. He thought, he's a young whippersnapper. He hated Robert Kennedy, and that feeling was mutual. The whole Kennedy clan hated him. He thought, he's some rich Catholic snob. So he's the one that I question why.
He hated Nixon. Him and Nixon just like
did Nixon actually like anybody?
Well, no, LBJ just despised Nixon. Like they just.
Well, Truman hated him as well. No, Truman said something about him.
I think there may have just been some good old fashioned political hate involved in that. It's like, okay, I'll run for vice president because anything that lets me dig a Nixon, I'm in.
Yeah, true. So Nixon, I think, probably didn't even like anybody apart from maybe his wife and kids. So
Nixon would be a great Harry Potter character, wouldn't he?
Oh, he would be like that professor, that evil professor. They should do the one where like they're all professors. That'd be fun. Who would be your favourite professor? Or even if you went to normal life, who'd be your favourite teacher at school kind of thing? What they'd all study, what they'd all teach.
Funny enough, Biden will probably just claim to be a professor at Hogwarts the rate we're going right now with him claiming professorships at schools he didn't actually even been at. Sarah Stook, this is fun. For people that haven't delved into the Harry Potter universe, though, just as a way to kind of put a bow on this, when you're slotting these leaders, these real famous people that all Americans know into it, you ought to do that prime minister list. That ought to be fun. Maggie Smith.
I know the names and that, but like they'd say, what's Gladstone like? I'd be like,
Maggie Smith as a wizard Thatcher is just gold. That has to happen. But anyway, when you're looking at these and assigning them to a fantasy world, what's the biggest thing you take away from them? Because Harry Potter is so popular. It's such a main, my kids are a wide age gap and all of them like the Harry Potter stuff. It's become just this cultural thing. How do you put them and bring it? Because I think this is a cool idea of putting historical figures in there and kind of teaching it in. What's your criteria though when you looked at it though of like, okay, because somebody like a Washington's kind of easy because he's this marble statue of perfection in our minds, but then you get to those bad people. So how did you go about it?
I wanted to avoid the whole good and bad idea that everyone good would be in Gryffindor, everyone bad would be in Slytherin. And I wanted to look at beyond what we thought of people. Somebody questioned putting Herbert Hoover in Hufflepuff. But to me, he's the perfect Hufflepuff. You're looking at not the presidency itself, but the person. Herbert Hoover was a terrible president. No one can deny that. But he was a very good man, and he was an amazing humanitarian. He did so much after the World Wars that you must respect him for it. Who again came from nothing. Orphan John was the first student at Stanford, became an oil engineering millionaire. So I think it's looking at the person and not just, people think automatically, Jackson would be a Slytherin, Trump would be a Slytherin, just some their reputation. But I think you've got to dig really deep into that person.
Sarah Stook. Love talking about this stuff. This is fun. This is much more fun. It's a nice little break from politics. Let's focus on everything, keep up with you. I know you mentioned Elections Daily. You're doing some writing there. You wrote for me at Ordinary Times a time or two. You do some other things. Let folks know how to keep up with you.
Yeah.
So we'll figure out your next crazy caper to bring on us.
I'm writing up for Ordinary Times about this. Your editor asked me to do that, so I'm going to write up the Hogwarts thing for you guys. Elections Daily, I've got 2 coming out. One's the inevitability of presidents. He was the most likely, he was the least likely. And then 50 days that changed America. So like the fifth, obviously not 7 days, but 50 days that were really important. So from like Declaration of Independence to 9/11, that kind of all the days that really changed, politically, socially, economically, culturally.
Good stuff. Can't wait to see it. Sarah Stook, love chatting. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Like I heard, let's end on a good note, which we try to do when we have time. Let's go out to California. NBC News is written by Patrick Smith, Seaside, California, to be exact. A California man who was ordered to keep his boat out of sight has had the last laugh by commissioning an artist to paint a realistic image of it on the fence that obscures it. Etienne Constable from Seaside, California, was told in July last year by the local government officials that he had to build a 6-foot fence to hide the boat from the views of his neighbors. And we'll add the link in the show notes. It's a boat on a trailer. Like a lot of people, he leaves his boat on his trailer. One that protects it too. It makes it easy to take it hither and yon when you want to go boating. So it's parked in his driveway. They said they got to hide it because of local ordinances or whatever. Back to the piece. But in a lighthearted jab at the officialdom, Constable decided to follow that directive, which said nothing about how the fence should be decorated, asked local artist Hanif Pani to create a mural that makes it look as if the fence isn't there. Quote, I'm not a rule breaker, but I'd like to make a political statement as necessary, as well as a humorous statement and a creative statement, he told NBC affiliate KSBW of Monterey Bay. Now, when you look at the picture of this thing, he basically painted it because the top of the boat pokes over the fence. So he just painted the boat. So it's landscape, the driveway, the gate being opened if it wasn't painted on the gate, and the boat itself. So it looks pretty realistic with the top of the boat, and it all matches up. It's pretty clever. Only problem with that, of course, is when he goes to park it, he's got to park it in a certain spot, but I'm sure he's already figured that out. Back to the piece. He has yet to have any contact from the city about the mural, but added that he considered it covered by the right to freedom of expression as enshrined in the First Amendment. I hate that enshrined word, by the way. We'll hack that some other time. Quote, the reaction is extremely important and more than we ever expected, and we're both just tickled about it, talking about the artist, Constable said. Pani, who paints images across the Central Coast area, this is the artist, told the news station, quote, I am a big proponent of public art spaces. It engages people in ways that reaching out and having conversations doesn't sometimes. And Pani added that since the Seaside boat mural has gone viral, other boat owners have approached them to see if they can do the same for them. He's absolutely right, by the way. You want to talk about the zoning ordinances? People eyes roll in the back of the head. You start talking about what you can and can't do in your own yard and the rights of that, people get up in arms about it real quick. And if you can do a physical thing like this, that's visual and you can see it and it goes viral, now you can have a discussion about things like ordinances. Now, a lot of people thought this was an HOA situation. It's not. This is the actual local government that told him to do this. So those are important questions that we need to talk about. It is an election year. People like your city councilors and folks like that, they're up for election. These are the kind of things that they take care of. It's a fun way, and I'm always for local artists getting a little extra work. Good for them. Happy story. We'll link to it in the show notes. More Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Just want to remind folks, if you haven't yet already, the Substack is the one-stop shopping for everything going on with Heard Tell, with my writing. When I do media appearances, we put that on there as well. We also bring some stuff out of the archives every now and then. Great resource, and it's completely free. And all you got to do is log in, subscribe with your email. Everything we do will go directly into your email. You can find us. You'll never miss a thing. heardtell.substack.com. Again, it's completely free. If you want to give us money, we'll take it, but it doesn't cost you anything for the content. Everything will be right there. That includes shows we do. If I pull out any of the old Yonder and Home food pieces, if I'm doing something for Ordinary Times, I also have a agreement with the Fayette Tribune folks where after the first run of the print paper, I can put it on there as well for you to also see, because some of our overseas friends cannot get onto the news site when I do things in the paper. Anything I do, there'll be stuff there. Plus, we also do a newsletter every Sunday. Didn't do it this past Sunday because I was doing family stuff for Mother's Day and other things. But Sundays, we have a newsletter thing. We're also working on some new content we're going to be doing coming up. So all one-stop shopping, Heardtell, heardtell.substack.com. You can follow me personally on Twitter, for the Fire, Heardtell Show at the Twitter as well, if you want to follow along on there. We're not on Instagram and Facebook yet, but the kids are bugging me, telling me we got to do it. So when we do that, we'll let you know. And that'll do it for what we're going to do for today. So wherever you are, whoever you're with, we hope you're well. We hope you're well fed. We can't wait to talk to you again soon for more Heard Tell.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.